So we've talked a lot about the NIL bills that the NCAA has wanted to see in Congress. There are two right now. We talked about one last week that came. They're both bipartisan. That came from Senators Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, Jerry Moran of Kansas, and Cory Booker of New Jersey. And this one is from Democrat Joe Manchin and Republican Tommy Tuberville. And Tommy Tuberville, obviously, former coach at Auburn and Cincinnati and Tech.
All-time great at Texas Tech. Legendary stint at Texas Tech.
Left in the middle of an actual recruiting trip to go to Cincinnati.
Yeah, that was the rumors. Yeah, he ducked out, during the whole deal. So, that was wild.
Where's Coach Tuberville? He had to run out.
It might have taken Tech a little while to get over that, but they're far better off, I think, now at this point.
So this is the Protecting Athletes, Schools, and Sports Act. The bill would preempt NIL state laws and require a uniform NIL contract for all parties entering into said contract. It would allow the NCAA to prohibit certain types of deals, such as those with gambling companies or alcohol brands. The NCAA would be in charge of enforcing and investigating such rules, but would have the support of the Federal Trade Commission, which would handle the registration of agents and collectives, as well as the National Public NIL Deal Registry. Collectives and boosters would be required to formally be affiliated with schools. And the act would guarantee health insurance for sports-related injuries for uninsured student athletes for 8 years following graduation from a four-year institution. And there's some deals on that. And athletes would only be able to transfer and play right away after completing their first 3 years of academic eligibility. This is the part that sounds like it was written by an old school coach.
Well, this is also the part where Bruce Feldman chimed in and said Tuberville didn't even stay at Texas Tech 3 years before he bailed out of that program right in the middle of a recruiting dinner like we just talked about. So he could bail out in the middle of a recruiting dinner, but these athletes, they have to stay for 3 years and can't budge. That just seems a bit hypocritical, does it not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that Joe Manchin, by the way, came down off his yacht to do some work to do this. The act would establish a publicly accessible internet website on which the FTC shall publish and frequently update anonymized and aggregated name, image, and likeness data. So while you wouldn't know who had it, you would know how much is being spent. So then you could probably also, a lot of times, guess who that is at certain places. But I would say that this is not good for this getting done because these bills have a lot of things similar. They're both very vague on whether students can ever be called athletes. They're both include healthcare provisions. The last bill would allow athletes to go undrafted in professional sports and then the ability to return to school, which is something I kind of like a little bit, but then that really messes up your timetable on building a roster.
Yeah, let's kind of unpack it here. Let's use a little bullet point that Nicole Auerbach put together on her article. So it would make any state laws that include revenue sharing illegal. Mm-hmm. Also allows the NCAA to prohibit certain types of deals, as you mentioned, with gambling companies or alcohol brands. Keep gambling out of college sports, please. Yeah. They're everywhere. They've infiltrated everywhere. You can infiltrate this show if you'd like to. Just hit me up. But still, as far as college sports goes, we don't need them involved in that as well. Alcohol, I totally understand. I get that most college athletes probably drink alcohol, but I don't think there's anything wrong with not having them a part of the broadcast or as part of these deals. The bill would make any state laws that include revenue sharing illegal, though. That seems like pretty major. That seems like it's a pretty notable part of this.
That's a shot right at California right there.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and it's a shot into the heart of anybody who's trying to get revenue sharing to become a thing and that feel like that's the next logical step. Now, granted, a lot of those people are at least in some cases, of course the athletes would love to have revenue sharing. I'm sure their families would love revenue sharing. I'm sure the sharks that encircle them, though, would really love revenue sharing. But the bill making any state laws that include revenue sharing illegal, that just creates a whole potential set of messes. What if the SEC were to decide that we're going to move forward with revenue sharing? I mean, that's one of those things where there's going to be split opinions on that. As clearly as you've outlined, like the state of California is trying to, in so many ways push that. So That's definitely notable as making revenue sharing illegal, no matter the state law. NCAA in charge of enforcing and investigating such rules, but would have the support of the Federal Trade Commission, which handle the registration of agents and collectives, as well as the National Public NIL Deal Registry. Collectives and boosters would be required to be formally affiliated with specific schools. So how do we feel about a national registry of public NIL deals and collectives and agents and all of that being formally affiliated and registered?
I actually think that's a good idea. I think that if the more above board you can keep this and regulate it, then the better. I think it's a good idea in theory, but I worry about it in practice because, I mean, our government's not good at.
Do we do that for everything?
Yeah,
I mean, we don't keep that track. We don't count every penny of everything else. Why are we going to suddenly do it with college athletes?
Yeah. You know, and there's these things will now have to be registered, and we have other things that won't be. I mean, I don't know. We're not good at this. We're not good at it.
Yeah,
so I don't know if it's going to work or if it's just going to be one of the things that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, and they would have a website, the FTC, where you could go and look up the exact NIL deal. So I can see where we're privately. I mean, as much as we would probably love to know some of those things, like how much is so and so getting paid. That reminds me, I forgot about the Arch Manning note. He signed with Panini Cards. So he's not even played and probably won't even play this year much. And he's already getting deals because of his star power. But anyways, so yeah, there would be a federal registry, and you could go check out, I guess, all these deals. And there's definitely some people that are opposed to that idea. The act would guarantee health insurance for sports-related injuries for uninsured student athletes for 8 years following graduation from a 4-year institution. So there is the 8 years after for graduation, though. I think a key word here. Following graduation, the responsibility to fall either upon the school at which the athlete played or a newly formed trust fund taken from 1% of annual proceeds from revenue-generating collegiate tournaments, including the men's basketball tournament and the college football playoff. So health insurance and some of that would come from the tournaments themselves, and following, your active play for what looks like it would be several years as long as you graduated.
Yeah, health insurance has to be a big part of this. I think that it's
sports-related injuries, though, was the key phrase. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can just give them health insurance that covers everything in general.
Yeah, I don't want to bog down. I think it's more like if you tear your ACL, that's sports. Okay, they'd cover that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, again, I think having health insurance that would cover those things is important because they look those. Just because you didn't go to the pros doesn't mean you're not going to have a lasting injury or something that happened to you when you were 21. So yeah, I think that there are good parts to both of these things that maybe if they can get them together and make it work, will work. It just, I have so little faith in our ability to actually
work together
and execute these things. And here's the other part that's really going to be unfortunate for the NCAA. They can now say, look, we've got bills. It's now up to the leaders to pass them or to bring them up to vote. There's 2 different ones. And so now you have to figure out which one you're going to do.
Well, let's get into that. There's one more bullet point on that she outlaid on this new bipartisan bill from Manchin and Tuberville, and that would be the transfer part that you mentioned. I don't think we really talked about that, though. Athletes would only be able to transfer play right away after completing their first 3 years of academic eligibility. Exceptions to this would include a death in the player's family or a head coach or position coach leaving the school. So that opens up a whole door that otherwise, if it was shut, would seem very limiting, but that at least gives you some freedom, and yet 3 years at a place, I don't think that's going to be a very favorable part of this at all.
That's why it's probably not going to happen because it'll get fought. I mean, they already lost legally in court on that particular issue. And just because they pass a law, now they have to pass a law that says that this court case, was I mean, they've been all these different things that have happened. And if a head coach leaves, okay, that means that you can limit the transfer portal some because while there's a lot of head coach vacancies, that's not all of it. But if you have a position coach leaving, that means any coach leaving, then that's all that they have to say because that happens all the time.
Yeah. It does, yeah, because, I mean, just for guys that don't work out or guys that get calls elsewhere, I was thinking about, how many teams have lost a wide receivers coach like 3 years in a row? So you just have an open gate basically to anybody to transfer every year. Although it's not really different from that right now, this would be more limiting in that you'd have to have that reason, whereas opposed to right now, you can just do it just because you want to and because you think the grass is greener elsewhere. But those are the basic parts of this. That would be the national registry, for deals to go and be able to look at. Would have all that information in a single place, and also formal affiliation for collectives and boosters, the prohibition of alcohol or gambling deals, the guaranteed health insurance as long as you're 3 years in. And then the transfer part of this, which it does seem like the transfer one's the most strict one, and that's the one that probably will get this caught up, is just the whole 3 years before you're able to transfer other than the coaching part of this. And based on what she wrote, I mean, these are pretty similar overall. The restrictive part of that transfer piece of Manchin and Tuberville is definitely the big difference.
And the antitrust piece.
And the antitrust piece is the other big difference.
Yeah. I actually don't know if either of these bills has been written to get passed, or they've just been written to be like they're there. So
they're there, but at least they're, I guess if you're on the NCAA side of things, or you're on the schools, whoever is in favor of having broad rulings and how all this should operate nationally, rather than every state law has its own little individual thing. I mean, this is progress. The fact that they're even talking about this, and the fact there's been as many articles written about it. So clearly, old Charlie has done some good. Mr. Baker, roaming the halls of D.C. and talking to his old buddies, far more than it seems like the previous regime was able to get as far as momentum going. But does it end up in an actual bill at the end of this? That remains to be seen, and it does feel like perhaps you're going to have some melding together. Although they're sort of similar, but some maybe all comes together at some point. But standing on their own, it's hard to see either of these just passing through with flying colors. But hey, like I said, it's more than anybody thought was probably even possible at this point. There's actually a little inkling of like, well, maybe Charlie Baker got some work done, and maybe he did. We don't know because we're not at the end road. But that was of interest. That proposed bill.
Yeah.